Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to talk about AWS's hypervisors, isolation of AWS resources, and AWS firewalls or security groups. So let's start with what a hypervisor is. And if you go to Google and just type hypervisor in, you'll get the Wikipedia definition, which is a hypervisor or virtual machine monitor is a computer software, firmware, or hardware that creates and runs virtual machines. A computer on which a hypervisor runs one or more virtual machines is called a host machine, and each virtual machine is called a guest machine. So basically, a hypervisor is the physical host that is going to run your virtual machines, like so. So EC2 currently runs on the Xen hypervisor, and Amazon have been using Xen for years and years and years. However, there is a little catch. C5 instances have just been launched, and in that launch, they accidentally, I don't know if it was an accident or not, but they said that the C5 instances were running on KVM. Now, that's a big shift if they're going to suddenly go and change hypervisors, because if you think about the number of like physical machines they have all around the world, managing a new hypervisor or switching to a new hypervisor would be a very big project. As soon as that got leaked from the blog, Amazon went in and actually deleted the blog. I'm wondering if they're waiting to make this announcement at reInvent, but the register basically managed to capture the before and after, so by then it was already news. Let's wait and see what happens at reInvent, but the C5s they did announce is running on KVMs, but everything else is on Xen hypervisors. So Xen hypervisors have guest operating systems running either as para virtualization or using hardware virtual machines, so PV or HVM. And you can see that when you go in and try and provision your EC2 instances. Some will say HVM, some will say PV. HVM, you can basically only have Windows on HVM. PV, you can have Linux instances. So HVM guests are fully virtualized. The VMs on top of the hypervisors are not even aware that they're sharing processing time with other virtual machines, whereas PV is a lighter form of virtualization, and it used to be a lot quicker. However, this performance gap's basically closed now, and Amazon now recommend using HVM over PV where possible. It's also worth, like I said, noting that EC2 instances, Windows EC2 instances can only be HVM, whereas Linux instances can be both PV as well as HVM. Para-virtualized guests rely on the hypervisor to provide support for operations that normally require privileged access. So the guest operating system has no elevated access to the CPU. The CPU provides 4 separate privilege modes, so 0 to 3, and these are called rings. And ring 0 is basically the most privileged, whereas ring 3 is the least. And the host operating system, so the Xen hypervisor itself, is going to be executing in ring 0, but the actual guest operating system will be executing in ring 1, and then all your applications are basically executing in the least privileged ring 3. So let's have a look at what this looks like. So we've got our rings here. Ring 0 is our most privileged, and that's where our Xen hypervisor runs. Inside ring 1, we're going to have our EC2 instances, and I should point out again, this is for PV only. So in ring 1, that's where we have our EC2 instances, and then our actual applications are in ring 3. So they're segregated by these different rings. Let's talk about isolation. So we have basically our physical interface down here. So we've got our network, our network cards, etc. We then have a firewall. The firewall itself actually runs at the hypervisor layer, and Amazon manage all that for us. And the firewall essentially allows us to create our own security group. So we've got customer 1 who's got a security group, customer 2 who's got a security group, customer 3 who's got a security group, etc. They're all isolated from each other, and they're all isolated by the firewall, which is running at the hypervisor layer. We then have our virtual interfaces. So these are our virtual network cards. And then we have the actual hypervisor itself, and then we split it down into individual customers. So we've got customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, customer X, etc., etc. So when we interact with this environment, basically we're going through a physical interface, we're hitting the firewall. The firewall is then splitting our traffic, and it's completely isolating it through our security groups, through our virtual interface, through the hypervisor, back to our resources. So these could be your EC2 instances, etc. So that happens, and it's done by the firewall. So it is complete isolation between customers. In terms of who has access to the AWS hypervisors, it's just administrators with business needs and to be able to access the management plane. They're required to use multi-factor authentication to get in there. The actual management plane or the hosts are purpose-built, so Amazon have gone out and built them for themselves. The hosts are systems that are specifically designed, built, and configured and hardened to protect the management plane of the cloud. All such access is logged and audited, and when an employee no longer needs business need to access the management plane, the privileges and access to these hosts and all relevant systems can be revoked. In terms of the guest operating system access, well, we all know that that's our responsibility. So virtual instances are completely controlled by us, the customer. We have root level access, and we basically connect in using our key pairs. With Linux instances, we're using SSH. With Windows instances, we're using RDP. AWS does not have any access rights to our guest operating systems inside EC2. And something else to note is just around memory scrubbing. This occurs both for disk memory as well as RAM memory. So EBS automatically resets every block of storage used by the customer so that one customer's data is never unintentionally exposed to another. Also, memory allocated to guests is scrubbed or set to 0 by the hypervisor when it is unallocated to a guest. The memory is not returned to the pool of free memory available for new allocations until the memory scrubbing is complete. So everything is scrubbed. You cannot go in and use disk recovery tools and recover some other customer's data. It doesn't work. It is scrubbed. So that is it for this lecture, guys. Just in terms of my exam tips, you'll want to choose HVM over PV where possible in terms of performance. PV is isolated by layers. Guest operating system sits on layer 1, applications on layer 3, and of course our host or our hypervisor sits inside layer 0. Only AWS administrators have access to the hypervisors. The staff don't have access to EC2 at an operating system level. That's your responsibility as a customer. And all storage memory and RAM memory is scrubbed before it's delivered to you. So we're at the end of section 4. I'm just going to have one more lecture where we just go through all the summary slides so that you've got it all in one go. So that way you can, before sitting your exam, just watch the ends of section 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.